Jerry Boyle is my name. I'm chairman of AgriSearch, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this evening's webinar on coping with the challenges facing dairy farmers over the coming winter, and most importantly, providing solutions as well to those challenges. For those of you that don't know much about AgriSearch, the first thing I want to say is that we're funded entirely from levy contributions from Northern Ireland farmers, and we have two main remits. Number one is we see our job as articulating the research and innovation needs of Northern Ireland farmers, and also we see it as so important to bring you the best in science that's relevant to your business as practicing farmers. And indeed, that's what this evening's webinar is all about. So we have three excellent speakers lined up for you this evening, and they'll be presenting on the topic, but the same topic from different perspectives. And I believe the presentations will be complementary. First of all, we have, from a research perspective, Dr. Sinclair Main, and probably a person that doesn't need much introduction, but he has a distinguished career in AFBI, in the Department of Agriculture in Northern Ireland, and in ARI&I as well. And of course, he's also a research advisor for us here in AgriSearch. Our second speaker is looking at the issue from the perspective of business technologist with CAFRE, and also lives in a dairy farm. And our third speaker will look at the important issue of animal health, and that's a presentation by Dr. Mark Little, who's a veterinary advisor with Fane Valley. And we're very proud in AgriSearch to say that he completed a PhD under AgriSearch and Northern Ireland Farmers funding. So just before I hand back to Jason, just to discuss some of the housekeeping in detail, I just want to say this event tonight will really benefit from your questions. So we want plenty of questions. We'll take the questions at the end of Mark Little's presentation, and please use the Q&A button on your Zoom menu there to tabulate your questions. But look, it's been a very challenging few months for the sector. You know, the year started off fairly well, but then from the end of June or earlier, indeed, it's been nothing but continuous rain. And silage making in particular, of course, has been affected, especially quality. And that's going to be a big issue that will be discussed this evening. As you know, AgriSearch maintained the grass check database, and it's shown, not surprisingly, that grass quality has been poor throughout the year. At present, we're looking at a dry matter of just 15% and a metallizable energy of 11.1. Growth as well has been back on the long-term trend, little less than a ton behind the 10-year average. Thankfully, fertilizer prices have eased a bit, but feed prices are still at all-time high. And of course, the drop in the milk price in recent times has meant that there's cost price pressure now on farmers, aside altogether from dealing with the challenges of a difficult fodder situation. So tonight's webinar, as I say, is designed to brief dairy farmers on the options that you can take this autumn to deal with poor silage in particular. And more importantly, it lays out the steps that you can take to safeguard animal health and help keep your farm business in a state to get through what will be a very challenging period. So, Jason, do you want to say something about housekeeping before we we ask Sinclair to kick off this evening's proceedings.
No problem. So just as usual in the webinar, you are automatically muted, but we do encourage you to ask as many questions as possible through the Q&A function. So you'll see the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and use that and not the chat box. Upvote any questions you want answered for other people by pressing the thumbs up icon. If you have any issues, leaving and rejoining will usually fix them. And just to note, the webinar will be recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel at a later date. And also a request to please fill in the feedback survey at the end, as this is very helpful to us in designing future webinars and other events. Thank you. Back to you, Jerry.
Okay, Sinclair, the floor is yours, virtually anyway.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Jason. Good evening, everyone. And as Jerry has already mentioned, 2023 has been a very challenging season for everyone. And really, I would say it's been a season of two halves. And what I would like to do in the next 15 minutes is really look at the implications of the difficult silage season this year, what that will mean for winter feeding. And I suppose the real problem we face is that not alone have we the issue of low silage quality for a lot of second cut, but the real challenge is also going to be facing into a winter with a much lower milk price than we certainly had last year. And that brings huge challenges in terms of the financial viability of businesses. But I think the key message I would have is that by at least addressing some of these issues, starting to think about them now, will at least, I'm not saying it'll make the challenge disappear, but it will make those challenges easier to deal with during the coming winter. So next slide, please. So yeah, I mean, reflecting back in May and June, we never saw it so good in terms of first cut silage. Some excellent quality silage made, but really from late June onwards, the season has been a real challenge. And I suppose the key outcome of all of that is that there are certainly some very good first cut silage on many farms, but second cut was delayed, and many silages of poor quality taken in broken weather. And indeed, there's been a very limited opportunity for third cut on some farms because some of the area normally used for silage has had to be grazed just with the challenging season. So next slide. So the issues really are that I think we need to think about at this stage are, first of all, silage quantity. We're in late August. Most of the growth season is over, although, as Jerry has mentioned, we actually have seen a surge in grass growth in late August. And it's a big if we get some decent weather into September and October, then that can make a big impact. But I think we need to start to look at silage quantity now, and start to budget for the winter. Secondly, we need to look at the impact of low quality silage second cut, what that'll mean, and then finally feeding options this winter with a lower milk price. Next slide, please. So as I say, planning starts now, and that's about assessing quantity and quality. And really, feed budgets are crucial. If there is likely to be a shortage of forage, then it's better to explore the options now. Leaving it to next February, March, or April, as we all know in the past, only creates massive challenges at that stage. So it's about prioritizing the winter fodder budget. Certainly, I couldn't emphasize enough that if we get good autumn conditions, then grass still has huge potential to reduce some of the winter feed demand. As Jerry mentioned, okay, dry matter is low, but ME of grass this week is 11.1 megajoules per kilo dry matter. That's a lot better than many second cut silages, which are likely to have an ME possibly below 10. Protein is up 19%. So grass quality is good. If conditions improve and it's possible to graze it, then certainly I would urge everyone to maximize the use of autumn grazing between now right up to the end of October. And my view is if it's there and you can graze it in October, graze it then. Don't be trying to carry it over into February, March next year, because who knows what the weather conditions are going to be like then. Secondly, then, the whole question of looking at options for fodder purchase, and that really will depend on the feed budget and the local situation. Obviously, there's options like whole crop silage. Maize silage will be coming on the market fairly soon as well. The only thing I would say there is do look at value for money. And it's very easy to get carried away and overspend on forage. So it's important to look at what you're actually buying in terms of dry matter and analysis, and make sure it stacks up against the alternative feeds that are available. And then on the demand side, obviously there may be scope to move some surplus stock on quickly, whether that's cull cows or additional replacements that might be being carried on the farm. Again, it's important now to look at all of those to try and really make sure you've only got productive stock through the winter, that there's no passengers being carried which are going to eat into those precious fodder supply situation. So quantity is one part of the equation. Quality is the next part. Now is the time to analyze silages. Silage analysis systems have improved markedly in the last 10, 15 years. Very good guide to determine the feed value and to help with winter planning. So that's really essential. And based with those two bits of information, quantity and quality, you then can start to plan the winter feeding strategy, whether that's on your own with your advisor, with your nutritionist or whoever. I think that's really critical at this stage. Next slide, please. So just to look at what are the implications of this poor second cut silage. Well, obviously, the first thing is silage hasn't been cut as timely as normal for second cut. So there will be a lower energy value, which means a reduced ME. And to add to that further, then there's the whole question of potentially lower dry matter because of the variable weather conditions. And that could lead to poor fermentation in terms of low grass sugar and wet grass, which potentially then leads into a low intake situation. So the net result of all of that is lower energy intake. That'll impact on production and health and fertility. And Mark will focus on the health and fertility aspects in more detail in the third paper. But all of those are issues that we need to look at this winter. Next slide, please. So to try and put that in context then, what are the implications in numbers in terms of whether you look at digestibility or ME value? And really, these are numbers that go right back. I suppose they were first published about 30 years ago, and the situation hasn't changed. Many other things might have changed in life, but silage quality is still crucial for performance. And basically, every unit decline in D value means you lose between 1/3 and 0.4 liters per day less milk. And you're also likely to have lower milk protein because energy drives protein concentration. And then if you have a dry matter, a low dry matter or fermentation issue, then as I mentioned earlier, intake will decline, and that can further reduce animal performance. Next slide, please. So really what I think hopefully we'll try to illustrate this is what is the difference between good quality silage I've shown here in the blue line and low quality silage in the red line. And what I have is milk yield up the left-hand side and concentrate feed level along the bottom. And what that really shows is, irrespective of the level of concentrate feeding, whether you're feeding 7 or whether you're at the high end and feeding 14, silage quality makes a big difference to performance. And just on the next slide, you'll see that illustrated at 9 kilos of concentrate per day, for example. You'll see if you're feeding the same level of meal with a low quality silage or a good quality silage, potentially you're looking at about 4 liters of milk less with the low quality silage. And that's more or less consistent all the way up the line. Now, these are just examples of 2 silages and a feeding study that shows fairly typical responses. The actual difference in performance will depend on the genetics of your cow, the stage of lactation, and a whole host of other things. But by and large, the same rule will apply at any level of feeding. Good quality silage will produce more milk, as we all know. So the question really that I'll look at in the next couple of slides is, what are your options then in terms of trying to maintain performance with lower quality silage? But just to give another example, and this is an example fairly recently from AFBI, very much at the high end of the feeding scale. This was a study that Conrad Ferris published last year, where he looked at a very high quality silage, 75D, the sort of stuff that is around this year. There's some excellent silage made in middle of May during that really good weather. And then comparing it with a medium quality silage with a 68D. So in ME terms, which is what you'll see on the silage analysis, we're looking here at a 12 ME silage versus a silage with an ME of less than 10.9. The challenge that I see with a lot of second cut silages is some of them will be in the low 10s and possibly even below 10. So, you know, a situation could be worse on some farms. But in this study, Conrad was feed to yield system, feeding around 14.5 kilos of concentrate per day. And you can see in this particular example with medium quality silage, the reduction in performance was around 2.5 liters per cow per day. Milk fat was slightly higher on the medium quality silage, and that's because you've slightly less milk, a bit more fiber. But as I said earlier, milk protein is also reduced. And I think that is something we could well see this winter in terms of milk processors. We'll see significantly lower milk protein because of the lower energy intake from these poor quality silages. So move on to the next slide then. So really just to summarize so far where we are in terms of silage feeding, I think the key recommendation to everyone really is to start to plan the winter feeding strategy now, based on assessing how much feed you've got and its analysis. And on that basis, you can then develop a winter feed budget, having looked at the number of animals that you can keep through the winter and what options there are to buy. You can start to develop a winter feed budget. And the other thing to remember is that if you are feeding less concentrate this year because of the economics of production, then that in itself will also increase silage requirement. So that's something else you need to factor into the equation. So I would be estimating on reasonably higher silage intakes than perhaps you had last year if you were feeding more meal then. So obviously you want to prioritize first cut silage for early lactation cows and cows that are going to give the best response. And then the second point is that milk yields will be lower, somewhere between 2 and 4 liters per day, depending on the analysis of the silage, with second and or third cut silages. And I think it's really important to factor that into the financial budgets this winter. And that's something Martin is going to be talking about in the second paper. So I would urge people not to be planning on the same levels of milk output as they got last year. With the scenario they're going to be in this year, you need to be planning for less milk. That's just a reality of the situation, unfortunately. So moving on then to the other real problem we have this winter is obviously the very significant reduction in milk price compared to where we were last year. And it really is one of those classic things where the 1 year where we could have done with a decent milk price is this coming winter. But the reality is we're possibly looking at a milk price around 30 pence, whereas the average milk price last year, October to March, was around 46 pence. Concentrates have probably come back in price a little bit. I'm suggesting a worst case scenario here of £350 a tonne this year. Some people may be able to buy cheaper than that, particularly if they're using straights and so on. And that's obviously critical this year as well to try and drive that price down, but without sacrificing quality in terms of the feed. But the bottom line is really the issue I've highlighted here. And I think this is really important to remember that last winter with the good milk price, basically you only needed 0.82, so you needed less than a litre of milk for every additional kilo of concentrate you fed. This year, because of the changed economics, you're going to need 30% more 30% more milk. You need 1.12, so you're needing over 1.1 litres of milk to pay for every kilo of concentrate that's fed. And that really is a very challenging scenario, because very rarely at farm level do you get a response of 1.12 litres of milk for every kilo of concentrate fed. Normally you're below 1. So last year it was profitable to feed more because you're getting a good response in terms of the value of milk. This year it's less likely that will happen. And I think this is really illustrated in the next slide, which shows, again, it's the response with the low and good quality silage I was talking about earlier. And the important thing to remember here is, if you look at the slope of these lines, what it really shows is that if you're moving from 7 to 8 kilos of concentrate, so if you're on a low level of feeding, you will get a bigger response in milk. Whereas if you're up at 12, 13 kilos of concentrate, operating at that higher level, we have what's called a law of diminishing returns. So you get less milk for every additional kilo of concentrate that you feed. And Martin will refer to this in the subsequent paper. But what that really means is that the break-even feed level, which is where you want to be operating at, is more likely to be in around the 8, 9 kilos of concentrate this year, whereas it might have been 12, 13 or higher, depending on the farm situation last year. So that really is important to really put the brakes on concentrate feeding, because it simply won't pay with the economics of milk this year. But with that comes other issues. Obviously, you need to look at implications of that on cow health, fertility, and so on. So what I would say is, yes, perhaps feed a bit more. You might have to feed a bit more than break even in early lactation. But once cows are back in calf, then really that's the time to make the savings in terms of pulling back the level of concentrate feeding to make sure you're in a more economic situation. And that's maybe something we can talk about in concentrates in the discussion later. So really, just to summarize my part of the talk, there's no doubt, I think we can't but face up to reality. 23-24 will be very challenging for many farmers, but planning now will help to take some of the pressure out and help to control costs. So it's about doing those fodder budgets, silage quantity and quality, making good use of autumn grazing. We can only hope that we get a good back end, and that will make a big difference. Looking at options for buying fodder, selling surplus stock. And again, very simply, as everyone would know, maximizing the potential of the good silage that's there, reviewing options for second cut silage, but most importantly, really having a critical look at the level of concentrate feeding and just where you need to set that this winter in order to make sure that you are reducing potential losses and certainly to a minimum, and at least trying to work within a break-even situation. So hopefully that's useful. I'll hand back to you, Jerry. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks, Sinclair. That was a really excellent and succinct presentation. And of course, Sinclair's tables and indeed the presentations of all of the speakers will be available after this evening's session. Again, I want to remind you, don't forget to ask questions. Use the Q&A button. And it's very clear there. Sinclair has, I think, provided plenty of thought for questions, I'm sure. Key messages. It's a very basic message. Do your budgeting for your own situation, your own herd for the winter. And as Sinclair emphasized, focus not just only on quantity, but also on quality. And one big point that jumped out for me was in Sinclair's discussion on concentrate, that 30% more milk is needed now this year to buy concentrates than last year. I think that is a very telling point to bear in mind when you're doing your budgets. I'm now delighted to hand over to Martin Reel, as I said, who's a senior business technologist with CAFRE, and Martin will of course provide an advisory perspective on the challenges facing dairy farmers this winter. Martin.
Thank you, Jerry. Good evening, everyone. You're very welcome. And I suppose I'm going to look at broadly the same topic more from the business point of view. And as Sinclair said, there's issues about feed quality and quantity, and I suppose he talked about the concentrate feeding. So maybe we'll go into some more detail on the economic options on if they are viable or not on a farm level. So maybe the next slide there, please. So basically, we're setting the scene here. Last year, we were faced with rising input costs for your variable costs, your feed, your fertilizer, and fixed costs such as energy, etc. But they were mitigated by a rising milk price. Obviously they hit the return again. Next slide, there we'll get a graph up. So if we've seen, the average milk price paid in Northern Ireland over the last 20 odd years, 2022, the average milk price was just over 44.5p, which, if you look in historic terms, is way above the level. If you draw a line there at 30 pence a litre, that has only been exceeded in 2 of the last 20 years, excluding last year. So basically last year was an outlier, but very lucky that as costs raised, the price received on farmers basically were well compensated for milk production last year. But obviously this year we've seen the milk price has declined, and we're looking, perhaps as Sinclair mentioned, for the winter, maybe a price in the region of 30 pence. But unfortunately, those high input costs are still with us at farm level. I said feed price has eased, but not significantly. Fertilizer has eased, but again, not significantly. And also, we're still faced with high energy costs, high fuel costs, etc. So basically, at a farm level, these are all having an impact on our cash flow at the farm level. The purchasing power of your milk check compared to this time last year, the meal maybe took 20% of the milk check. Perhaps we're looking at over 50% of the milk check facing into winter. So those are all issues that we're going to see at farm level. The implications going forward. How are you going to manage those? Diminished returns, and will it impact your business? So look at the next slide, please. So what do we do to manage our own cash flow at farm level? So there's different approaches. So the first approach there, I don't think is an option, is do nothing. So if you see the next option, then there's knee-jerk reactions. So we can look at those. So sometimes farmers just stop spending. Those are all implications at farm level. I think the next presentation will look at the implications of for reducing spending on veterinary, animal health, those kind of negative long-term implications, or perhaps trying to increase output, increase cash into the business by feeding extra concentrate. But if we go on to the next slide, we'll look at some scenarios. So as Sinclair demonstrated in his presentation, there was a response last winter for feeding extra concentrates, but this winter, the return will be much less, if any at all. And also, producing extra litres of milk, we have to remember that milk has to be cooled. Energy costs are still with us. They're still quite high. So if we go on to the next slide, we'll have a look here at a partial budget for those extra marginal litres. These are litres produced over and above what is required to maintain the cow for genetic potential and stage of lactation. So last winter, we were looking at a milk price in the region of 47 pence per litre, and then feeding that extra kilogram of concentrate, it was generating a positive margin. It was when we took off we look at the concentrate price there, we £400 a tonne. So for every additional litre of milk produced, those marginal litres, there was a return last winter in the region of over 16 pence a litre. However, if we do the same budget for this winter, that extra litre of milk, so at 30 pence a litre, we're getting a return on our extra kilogram of concentrate of 1.2 pence. It gives us 36 pence. But when we take off those extra concentrate costs and deduct it from the extra litres, we're really left with a very marginal return of 1 pence per litre. And that's not even taking into consideration the higher energy costs we're seeing this winter. So I say at farm level, farmers need to consider, is it viable at their level? Again, you need to depends on your stage of lactation of your cows, your farm setup. But for the typical farmer doing that partial budget, it is very marginal, if at all, recommended to chase extra litres this winter. And so we'll look at another scenario there that some farmers may consider in the next slide. Some farmers, maybe when milk price is reduced, they may go to 3 times a day of milking. So we'll look at a scenario here of a 100 cow herd currently averaging over the winter 30 litres a day. So to go to that extra third milking, they may have to employ labour if family labour is not available. There's also extra electricity usage in running the milking plant and cooling the milk. And then there's the extra concentrate costs. And we're assuming a response to the milk production of the higher end here of the response to 3 times a day of milking of 15%, which on reality in lots of farms may not be achieved. But for this assumption, we're going to look at 15% response to producing that extra milk. So if we go to the next slide, we'll look at what it's costing. So we look at our extra income from those extra litres of milk. It's worth 90 pence per cow. However, to produce those 90 pence, we get that 90 pence. We've got the extra cost of labour, which equates to 50 pence per cow. We also have our extra electricity and our extra concentrate feed. So in total, our costs come to over £1 per cow. So if we hit the next button there, so we'll see in reality, for this example, going to 3 times a day of milking will actually cost over 11 pence per cow, almost 12 pence per cow per day. So again, it all depends on your own farm situation, but in this example, and probably on the majority of farms out there, it's not an option at current prices. But again, if someone has labour and feed prices lower, it may be a marginal option on some farms, but it very much depends on your farm situation. So if we go on to the next slide there, please. So also we're looking at how do we manage our cash flow. So we've looked at doing nothing, being knee-jerk reaction, but ultimately you need to take control of the situation and have a proactive approach. So as Sinclair said there, you need to plan ahead. And one of the first things that farmers should do is establish your own cash flow situation at farm level. So basically that's knowing what your inputs and outputs are going forward. So at a basic level, a farmer has his VAT book and his bank statements, and over a 3 or 6 month period, he can extrapolate how much expense is normally coming out of the farm business over that period of time and what income is normally generated. And it's a very useful tool to plan ahead and see where there may be peaks or troughs in income and how that may affect your cash situation, how you're going to pay current liabilities over a period of time. Maybe your overdraft level may be exceeded. So by planning now, you'll be fit to be proactive and maybe talk to your lender or your bank and say maybe you need a short-term extension on overdraft, or talk to some of your creditors, extend your terms. So there's those options, but say establishing where you are now is vital, to plan ahead for the months ahead. And also there's plenty of help there outside the farm gate. There's your CAFRE advisor. You talk to your bank manager, your accountant. Perhaps if you speak to your accountant now, you'll be fit to estimate your liabilities for tax due in next January. So you need to factor that into your cash flow. Speak to your suppliers, your farm consultant, your nutritionist. Hopefully you've got your silage analyzed. You know what your feed rate should be, how to manage your herd. And then there's other support out there if the farm business maybe is under pressure through rural support, and they have a mentoring service there for different supports available to farm families. And also there's other tools available to manage your cash flow within the business. And I suppose one of the important metrics within a dairy farm is your margin over concentrates. As I say, concentrates are the biggest expense on a farm, and if you manage those efficiently, you can make your business viable and sustainable in the future. So there's a dairy margin over concentrate program available on the CAFRE website or through the government gateway. other dairy organisations have the same program available for their suppliers. And then within CAFRE, the financial benchmarking gives you a long-term planning tool, how to manage a business going forward. So next slide, please. So how do we mitigate, the effects of lower milk price? So again, this theme will be touched on by all the speakers, but maintaining cow health and fertility is vital going forward. Keep your business sustainable in the long term. And Sinclair mentioned, and all the speakers will mention, feed efficiency is one of the biggest drivers of profitability at farm level. So knowing the quality and quantity of your forage, managing that correctly, targeting that to the most productive cows, maybe batching your herd, just keeping it monitored, using the margin over concept program. All those things can help manage your feed efficiency at farm level. And then also, to maintain cash flow, look at any unproductive or less efficient stock at farm level, and those passengers can be cashed in and help the cash flow, and then also reduce the feed demand at farm level. And I suppose another maybe more long-term plan, but I suppose from the benchmarking point of view, we would see that the dairy enterprise is the second biggest cost on farm level, and this should be assessed. Sometimes some farms maybe have too many replacements needed to maintain the herd. I know that obviously there's caveats with TBE and herd depopulations, but a lot of farms, those extra dairy heifers are a major cost and tie up a lot of cash at farm level. So next slide, please. I suppose in summary, within the benchmarking program, we're often asked, what is the key drivers to maintain an efficient, resilient business? I suppose there's a number of pointers we can give to the farmers. I suppose the first thing is manage your soils and your nutrient levels within those, because obviously they're the drivers for your forage production. You see there that the soil, the yield of grass is optimized by having your pH and your P and K levels at optimal levels. And then obviously maintain good forage quality on farm, both grazing and in silage, and have that analysed. Feed efficiency is a major driver in profitability on the top farms we look at in the benchmarking. We monitor your margin over concept on a monthly basis through the CAFRE program. Obviously, herd health and fertility are paramount for the long-term viability of a farm business. I suppose have a target within your farm. What is your lifetime yield? We see farms that have average lifetime yields in the region of 35,000 litres, as a good target, which if that is achievable, they're generally a very sustainable, profitable business. And then look at in the long term, milk quality pays. Have a target for over 580 kilos of milk solids sold per cow per year, and a combination, not one, but a combination of all of those things will help make your business more sustainable and viable in the future. And next slide, please. I suppose in summary then, at farm level, I suppose it's vital that you act early. You assess what your current situation is in terms of your cash flow projection going forward. Use whatever tools you have. Measure and monitor how you're performing at farm level. Use all the tools available. Engage professionals at farm level. So you've got your advisor, your consultants, your bank, your accountants, etc. Make use of them, and also use all available business tools that are right there to help manage your business going forward, and plan ahead. And I say, if you know where you stand, if you measure, you can manage. I suppose that's the key point. So have a starting point now for your cash flow, and hopefully that will, I suppose, avoid any major shocks down the line in terms of liabilities for that are due in the future, say Coniac, etc. Is there sufficient business and cash in the business to meet those future liabilities? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Martin. That was a really excellent and practical set of advices from an advisory perspective. And I want to remind everyone again of the importance of getting your questions in through the Q&A function. Again, Martin has picked up on some of the points that Sinclair made and interestingly expressed the challenge of milk prices, lower milk prices and high feed prices in a different way. I thought was, again, very interesting, his comment that 50% of the milk check now is taken up by feed costs compared to 20% in recent years. I think very sound advice as well in terms of when people are in difficult situations, the importance of avoiding knee-jerk responses or ill-thought-out responses. Hence, the important point was again emphasised of planning for the challenge. And Martin, I think, importantly added, apart from the fodder planning that's necessary, he really pointed out the importance of cash flow planning, and the two, of course, are complementary. And again, emphasising the importance of talking to your advisor or professional. Their job there is to help you in these situations. Right, that leads us to our final speaker for this evening, and after which we'll have the Q&A session, and that's, of course, Mark Layton, who will give you a perspective from a veterinary and animal health and welfare point of view. Mark.
Thanks for the introduction, Jerry. It's a pleasure to be here as Fane Valley Veterinary Manager and talk about this important topic. If we move on to the next slide, really what I want to say is Sinclair and Martin have covered the issues really well. And to summarise it in 2 lines, it's likely that there's going to be less silage available for winter feeding this winter. Not only that, what is available will be poor quality silage, particularly lower ME. So the impacts on production have been covered really well by Sinclair and Martin. So what I've been tasked with this evening are to cover the impacts on health and fertility. So what's the impacts of this lower amount of silage, which is of poor quality, on health and fertility? And I'm only going to cover a couple short few conditions of what I consider to be the most important issues directly due to silage quality issues, because we really want to find out what we can do to prevent these issues over the winter, because it costs more to treat than to prevent. Okay, next slide. And what I want to start with is nutrition is really intimately linked with health and fertility. You can't separate the two. And that's what I've been working with for over the last 10 years. The nutritional status of dairy cows is closely linked to the maintenance of an optimal immune system and health. So if you have poor nutrition, you also have a poor immune function and more prone to health conditions. Not only that, the second point there, poor nutrition during the dry period, particularly the dry period and early lactation, results in lower hormone levels. Now, what effects does lower hormone levels have? It has this knock-on effect to less strong heats, delayed ovulation, and lower conception rates. So it has intimately linked with fertility as well. So the next slide will cover really some of the health issues I consider in terms of energy balance and nutrition and energy balance and how this influences health. The issue of a lower energy intake is particularly important for energy balance in early lactation. This is where a lot of cows have a negative energy balance anyway to start with. If we look at this chart, and hopefully you can see it well, the blue line indicates, you can see the peak of the blue line, and that's the energy needed for milk production. And that peaks sooner than the energy is supplied by the diet and that the cow can eat in the dry matter intake. So this results in a negative energy balance. And this negative energy balance results in an energy deficit. And what does the cow do when she can't get enough energy to maintain her production? She mobilizes body reserves. So excessive body mobilization resulting in metabolic diseases. These metabolic diseases are due to a lower immune status. And the next slide will explain due to these negative energy balance as well. Now, you may firstly see clinical ketosis. I haven't often seen very many clinical ketosis. It is unusual because it is an extreme exacerbation of ketosis. But quite often you see some subclinical ketosis. And this can occur in all studies have shown up to about 30% of cows. So subclinical ketosis If we can't see it, what are the signs we can look for? Some of the signs are, if you're milk recording, high milk fat percentage and low milk proteins due to low energies, high milk fat due to fat mobilization from the body. And there's fat mobilization that comes through in the milk. Immune suppression, and this immune suppression due to negative energy balance has a knock-on effects. What's going to happen in early lactation? Mastitis, metritis, dirty calf beds, all of that. And all that is because, as the diagram shows on the right, glucose is the fuel for the immune cells. So if we have a negative energy balance, we don't have the glucose and we don't have the fuel for the immune cells. An interesting one again is lameness. Again, looking at the diagram on the right and the bottom, there's a fat pad at the bottom of the foot. And if you have a negative energy balance, all fat is mobilized off the cow's back, but also of the foot as well. And this fat pad acts like a shock absorber, so you can have lameness as well. And now, as I've said in the last slide, some reduced fertility as well. So the next slide, we'll look at what I see as some of the options in preventing negative energy balance. There's two options that I can see. One is reduce energy output in early lactation. And the second one is increase energy intake in early lactation. And this all is aiming and tipping the balance towards that positive energy balance or lesser negative energy balance. Next slide, please. Going into a little bit more detail. Reducing energy output in early lactation. Now, this could be an option of offering a lower protein concentrates to reduce milk yield. Word of caution that the ration always needs to be balanced. So always do this. If you are considering this, always consult your nutrition. But really, it's not what we want to do. And as Sinclair said, the aim is not to reduce production, but to maintain production. So the second option is increase energy intake in early lactation. And how can we do that? Firstly, and it's top of the list because it's most importantly, correct body condition score, CAFRE. And I put that at about body condition score 3 because a correct body condition score really influences dry matter intake in early lactation. So that correct body condition score drives intakes compared to cows which are over or under conditioned. As is previously said on this talk as well, targeting the good quality silage to those high lactation cows, to those early lactation cows, because they're the ones needed to meet their energy balance. And that possibly means lower ME silage to the dry cows, but we always have to make sure to keep those intakes high in the dry cows. Even though we offer lower ME silage, we want to keep the intakes up, keep the rumen full, and it drives intakes in early lactation as well. Could this be the year for a strategic use of monensin, which is your kextone boluses in cows? Monensin delivered as kextone is used a lot over in the States, used as kextone boluses here, and it changed the makeup of the rumen microbiota and the rumen bugs to make it more efficient. So you get more bang for your buck. It gets more energy out of every kilo of silage. So this could be a strategic year for kextone boluses, particularly in those cows which need it, which need a little bit more help, such as maybe sick cows, older cows, fat cows, or those with twins or are thin. Next slide, please. I also wanted to touch on, because I said in the previous slide, keeping the poor quality silage for maybe the dry cows. And as there is less silage and poor quality silage available, we do have to make sure that that dry cow diet is formulated correctly. So you just can't offer it to the dry cows. Make sure it's formulated correctly because, again, as I've said before, prevention is better than cure. For every 1 case of clinical milk fever, there are 8 cases of subclinical milk fever, which simply is low blood calcium. Clinical milk fever down a cow, so clinical milk fever looks normal, but the blood calcium level is not normal, it is low. And again, there's knock-on effects such as displaced sabomasum, retained placentas, metritis, dirty calf beds, again, lower intakes. And if your cow has lower intakes, it can knock onto ketosis as well, and mastitis. So preventing milk fever, the next slide is, again, it's no coincidence that the body condition score of 3 comes up here again, because that is vitally important to keep the blood calcium as close to the green line as possible in the normal zone. The yellow line is subclinical, where the cow is not down, but below normal levels, and the red line is clinical milk fever. Couple of dry period strategies, and it's making sure the mineral profile is correct, keeping the calcium low in the dry period diet. keeping the magnesium high in the dry period diet, having a look at decab diets. This is dietary cation and anion balance, adding in something like magnesium chloride, which slightly acidifies the blood, which helps activate the calcium control mechanisms. And of course, calcium supplementation just at calving. All those are key to controlling and preventing milk fever. And if you do have any issues, it's key to talk to your nutritionist and your vet. Next slide. One thing I thought I'd just throw in there, and I have been seeing some of these issues recently, is watching out with dry cow diets and colostrum, because colostrum is vital to support calf growth and vital to support the immune function of the calf, get it off to a good start. Low colostrum, either production quantity or poor quality, is seen with both low energy intakes and low amount of protein, particularly bypass protein. And there is some suggestions we may already be seeing this year. So do check your colostrum qualities and make sure it is these brick refractometers are easily bought off Amazon. We can give you some details where to buy them and what they should look like, and making sure your colostrum is good and high quality. Next slide, please. I thought I'd cover a bit about cost savings, because it may be you may be thinking about where can I cut costs, and what about the vaccines? Are all these vaccines necessary? What I'd say is there's no one size fit all with vaccines. I can't sit here tonight and say to cut one vaccine or another, because it all should be tailored to the herd challenge. And I don't want to get into too much detail with this graph. It's just some of the work we do with farmers, looking at BVD, IBR, Jonas, Salmonella, Lepto, looking at the challenges, looking at the antibodies there. Now, immediately, the herd on your left with all the red you consider is danger, all these positive antibody levels, looks to be in a better position than the one on the right, or the one on the right looks to be in a better position than the one on the left, because the one on the left is all positive and red. But it may not necessarily be that way. The one on the left may be vaccinating and the one on the right is not vaccinating, so it may be prone to a lot of challenge if something gets into the herd. So work with your vet, and vaccination should be tailored to the herd challenge and the risk available. Next slide. Yeah, as I said, consider speaking to your vet about these lab results in conjunction whether the herd is open or closed. Don't forget, vaccines, I consider them as insurance policies, because say you cut costs by dropping a vaccine, this can have severe consequences. And I've seen lots of examples in the past about farmers cutting, for example, a salmonella vaccine and getting abortion storms, or if there's a time of stress in round, and where do you get a time of stress? Example, poor nutrition, you can get reactivation of IBR. So it's key to have these vaccines all up to date. But do ask some questions about your vaccines, and this is where your vet will work really closely with you. For example, if you're vaccinating, if you're one of these herds vaccinating for IBR 3 times a year, it's licensed for twice a year. It should last 6 months. Maybe tweaking the timing and changing it to a less stressful time could help. Again, with calf pneumonia vaccine, could simple management changes help, such as some of these pictures I see. The one on the right, where we've put a little baton outside and louvered the tin out, has made a massive difference to these calves. The one on the left, the simple management change as well, increasing the ventilation. One point this year, if cattle are housed earlier, pneumonia vaccine may need to start now to get these animals well prepared for housing. So talk now and get your vet to help you with management strategies and ventilation as well. Looking at cost savings in the next slide in terms of worm and fluke. And again, similar to vaccine, strategic use of worm and fluke products. Big thing I say here is do not use them if they're not needed, because you're only wasting product and wasting money. And not only that, building resistance so it doesn't work in the future. Let's get some evidence, such as bulk milk tank samples, as I have done here. The herd on the left doesn't need to fluke or worm, and the herd on the right is positive for both. So get some evidence and fecal egg count your samples for young stock. Next sample. Now, slightly complicated, but I'll explain it really simply. Timeline on the bottom, October and November. This was last year. This is a fluke example last year where I was taking some blood samples. Herd 1 was negative in blood samples on the 18th of October, and a blood sample herd 3 and 4, 8 out of 8 negative blood fluke samples for that herd on the 28th of October for herd 2 and 3. Then move on to the 21st of October. Again, herd 1, I did some blood samples, again negative, but they were starting to creep in herd 2 and herd 3, where I got 2 out of 8 positive fluke samples and 4 out of 6 positive fluke samples. Big point here is, if any of these herds had used a fluke treatment before the 21st of November, would have been money wasted and it would not have worked. So do work with your vet to get some of the best treatment plans. Next slide, please. So summer 2022 was dry. However, this year completely different. It was wet from July onwards. So it's perfect conditions for mud snail development. I've been talking to vets. There've been no positive fluke blood results yet, but I'm going to check closely from mid-September onwards with these herds I've been checking last year. Next slide, please. So another point, and the last point I wanted to put in before the summary, is this the time to strategically cull cows? As I said again, silage quantity and quality is lower. And you've two real solutions if you're going to be stuck for silage. Do you buy more forage, or is this the opportunity to reduce cow numbers? Could now be the time to cull some of the passengers, such as your high somatic cell count cows, or work with your vet in conjunction to your Iones results and consider, severely culling some of your Iones cows, and maybe your cows your cows' calves, which have grown up and are in the herd milking now as well. So in summary, for the last slide, to go through all the points. Looking at nutrition, preventing against negative energy balance and milk fever is key. And you can use the good quality silage for early lactation cows, and formulating the poor silages with ensuring the correct mineral balance for dry cows. Vaccines, it's an insurance policy. Prevention is better than disease outbreaks. Worm and fluke products, I see a major opportunity to cost save here and prevent against resistance, but check to see if you need to use them. It's really easy to do a bulk milk tank check or fecal egg countings in some of the younger stock. And as I said, my last point, could now be the time to strategically cull cows. However, I don't know all your herds, and your vet knows your herd best, and your nutritionist knows your herd best. So please do consult with those people who can really help you. Thank you. Now that's it.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks, Mark. And again, that was another excellent and really comprehensive rundown of not only the challenges that our farmers are likely to face this winter because of the weather circumstances and the lower quality of silage in particular, but also you've outlined the importance of thinking strategically. And indeed, I think you have plenty of innovative ideas there. So I think there's plenty of scope for questions. I think you brought up an important issue, which Sinclair mentioned also, the importance of looking very strategically at your animals in terms of the costs of carrying passengers and so on. And that's sometimes can be a difficult decision for farmers. And of course, you rounded it out like Martin by emphasizing the importance of consulting with your vet and your nutritionist. Right. I'm going to, as I say, we can continue to ask questions using the Q&A function. And I'm going to hand over to Jason now, who will moderate the discussion arising from those questions. Jason.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. I've got a question here from Philip Clark. Is late lactation milk the most expensive to produce, and therefore would drying off cows early reduce costs and free higher quality silage for the drying off late lactation cows early? Would that free higher quality silage for the early lactation cows? So is that an option that should be considered?
I'll maybe kick in there, Jason, first, if that's okay. I mean,
yep.
Certainly it's a very good question. And I suppose there's a couple of issues. First of all, late lactation milk is generally high compositional quality. So, it's high in protein and fat and therefore quite valuable. But against that, it does come at a cost. And I think it's a good point that's made. If having done the fodder budgets and there is a shortfall and you've taken out the passengers and all the other things that have been talked about, and particularly this year, a lot of cows have ended up at this stage in poor condition because of the challenging weather conditions. Then it depends on the time of calving again, but certainly drying some of those cows off early might give them a better chance to get back. Okay, you'll lose a few litres this year, but you'll get better condition on them, and they might well perform better. They will perform better next year, when hopefully milk price will be back at a much more reasonable level. So you might have lost a bit of tail end milk this year, but you have a cow in better condition. You've saved a bit of silage, and she may well milk better next year when hopefully prices are back to somewhere in the mid, a lot higher than they are at the moment anyway.
Mark, anything to note from a veterinary perspective with a longer dry period?
Yes, it's a good option for those high cell count cows. Those high cell count cows, we talk about almost a self-cure over the dry cow period. So again, strategically targeting those high cell count cows and giving them a 10, maybe even 12-week dry cow period. Often you see them calving down, again, curing and a lower cell count. However, what I really would consider is, depending on whether you want to dry off cows early or not, is their body condition score. If you're giving them a longer dry cow period, what is their body condition score? Could they potentially become over conditioned with a longer dry cow period? And then that leads to knock-on effects such as milk fever and negative energy balance, etc., and health cleansings and everything. So I would consider the body condition score before doing this. If they're an optimum body condition score, a longer dry cow period could just tip them over the edge.
Okay, thank you. A question here on some of the cheaper feed stuff alternatives that are out there. For example, briskets and bread apparently available at around £100 a tonne, less than conventional concentrate. Well, I imagine the dry matter could be different. Is this a viable option to these, or is it better to avoid? Mark, again, maybe from that veterinary perspective, have you any experience with some of these byproducts that are available?
No, I don't, and it's not something I usually formulate a diet with. I get why you're trying to do it. I'm trying to think of some. I can't initially think of any health effects. I'll pass to some of the other team, and I'll have a think, and if I can think of anything, I'll come back in.
Martin, any thoughts from you on that one?
Again, I would stay away from the nutritional side of things, but I suppose it's part of a balanced diet. If you can have a way of including them in your straights and targeting them at maybe less productive stock, young stock, dry, far off dry cows, etc. For a period of time, there may be an option to stretch the existing forage. So it's I suppose it's part of the bigger picture, but you wouldn't go down that route solely. Those ingredients. I would point you towards a nutritionist, to formulate a diet based on your own particular farm situation.
Think of you any comments to add?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's a lot of interest in, and will be a lot of interest this winter in options to lower feed costs. The key element in all of this is analysis, and knowing what you're buying, what the analysis is in terms of its nutrient value, but not even its nutrient value, very simply just dry matter content. And I'll give a very simple example. I mean, concentrates at the moment, if you take £350 a tonne as worst case scenario, concentrates are about 88% dry matter. So that works out at £400 a tonne dry matter. If you have an alternative at £280 a tonne dry matter, and I just looked at this earlier, and let's say it's 70% dry matter, which a lot of these alternatives can be, there's water in them and whatever during storage or whatever. It might seem cheaper, it's £280 a tonne, but it's actually dear water. It ends up at £400 a tonne dry matter again. So I'm not advocating that to feed concentrates all the time, but just look carefully. What's the analysis? What's the storage? Will it keep? Is it a one-off, or will it be available over a longer period of time so that you can include it in a balanced diet, or is it just something that's here today, gone tomorrow? Ideally, you want something that you can include in the ration over a longer period of time and settle cows down on it. And also the ability to feed it. How handleable is it? If that's a proper English word, I'm not sure if it is or not, but can you handle it? And what sort of waste can you get with it as well? Because I mean, this is something I've seen in terms of silage. People paying a lot to buy silage, and yet you potentially have 15% losses in feed out. So all of these you need to look at carefully. Yes, there could be real opportunities out there, but do the sums carefully is what I'd say, and make sure you're getting value for money. And also make sure, as others have said, that you can balance it in the diet. But I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest in these options this winter. So
sorry, you something to say, Mark, there?
Yeah. Maybe I'm a slow thinker. I just thought of a couple of things. Well, firstly, Sinclair made a really good point about it being consistent. If you can get it this week and not next week, that's a real problem for formulating diets for cows. As we all know, cows like consistency. But there's two main things about getting these byproducts like that. And one is rotting, and two is molds. I mean, rotting seems a bit extreme, but you can, depending on the quantity you buy, it can go off a little bit in the corner of wherever you're storing it. And we're all familiar with botulism, and botulism occurs, it's not only any of these poultry houses, it is any rotting material. So there is a potential for botulism, and do be careful with that. And if it's not as extreme as rotting, even when it goes a little bit moldy, again, you have potential for mycotoxins, and mycotoxins lower the immune system and can cause a lot of issues there as well. So it may seem cheap. As Sinclair said, get it formulated in there. Is it consistent? But do be aware of some of these other issues, such as potential issues such as botulism and mycotoxins, which may occur and completely wipe out the value of it.
Mark, on that subject, is there an increased risk of mycotoxins this year with some of the silages that we have?
If we think about mycotoxins, mycotoxins occur from molds. So if you have grass which is grown in the field and has headed out, you particularly get the mycotoxins growing in around the head of the grass, and it needs this moist, damp, warm, humid conditions. And then you ensile it into the pit, and it doesn't go away. The drop in pH doesn't cause it to go away. So there is an increased risk, and it can in fact multiply in the pit as well, depending on which mycotoxin there is. Quite often it's not a single one, but it's a mixed mycotoxin load, which is what there's very little research on. We know they're there, and we know they work in a synergistic action to all of them work together to decrease the immune function. So yeah, there is the potential for that challenge this winter as well. Sorry to say, that's another challenge.
Okay. Question here. So let's say you're a farmer and you've got some good first cut, but then the second or third cut is of a lesser quality. So if I keep the best silage for the milking herd, and then I have my young stock, my dairy young stock eating poor quality, what meal levels and kind of quantity and quality do I need to feed to them to make up for the fact that they're eating a 10.9 or whatever ME silage? Any thoughts, Sinclair, from yourself on that, or Martin?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be a real challenge for a lot of people this year. Targeting the good silage at early lactation cows, and then trying to eke it out as much as possible there, which means that young stock may not be getting the choice silage that they would normally get, particularly young calves, weaned calves. So I think it is a case of looking at options there. What silage is available? Is there can you buy good quality big bale silage? There was some good quality big bale silage made at the start of the year. If it's replacements, it'll go a bit further in that their intakes will be lower. So that's an option depending on the price, rather than feeding concentrates. But I think the key thing there is monitoring growth rate. and formulating accordingly, so that that you're picking up if calves are struggling early on, or heifer replacements are not getting the target 0.7, 0.8 kilos a day. Then you want to rectify that early before you get 3-4 months down the road where you've lost 15, 20, 30 kilos behind target. So probably more than ever this year, it's about monitoring growth rates in replacements, and if need be, having to bring something better into the ration to try and maintain performance at the target level, because you still want those heifers to calve down at 2 years. You don't want them suffering as a result of this year and dragging over, because that's long term obviously much more detrimental. So I think monitoring growth rates and trying to look at what options are available to keep growth rate on target.
Okay, now one of the things that people will do on occasion when they're running tight in silage is feed straw, put straw in a mix. It's quite common in the dry cow practice, dry cow ration anyway. But this year, obviously, straw may not be of the same quality. It's been a very challenging year for the cereal farmers too. So what are the risks? Maybe we can come to you, Mark, back on this one, for, if you are maybe feeding straw that's maybe suboptimal, to stretch out silage in your dairy, in your dry cow and your young stock rations?
Great question, Jason. And funny, we were talking at an on-farm event today, and we were talking about this exact issue. There is a lot of straw out there which is molding, and in terms of quality, in terms of intakes, obviously it will knock intakes, and it will not be of the same nutritional value. Not as great anyway, but it will not be of the same nutritional value. However, I'm even seeing this lower quality moldy, dusty straw causing a lot of calf pneumonia issues, dealing with a herd with that at the moment, just with that physical insult in the respiratory tract. So even at the moment, it is causing a lot of issues. So it's one to watch out for this year. I know there's straw available from different areas, and they really seem to be at a premium if they're not moldy. I'll not say where they're from, but they do seem to be at a premium, and I would say it's probably worth it, spending that little bit extra to get higher quality straw. You've less issues, less ammonia issues, and if you are feeding it, it would be higher quality. Again, thinking about mycotoxins as well.
Okay, and then I have another one here. Obviously, we've got 2 weeks to the end of the artificial fertilizer close period, and the question here is, will I get a sufficient response from sowing fertilizer before the end of the close period? If someone's thinking of buying candidate, it's around what, 350, I think, at the moment. Will you get a response from that at this stage of the season? Sinclair, Martin, either you want to comment on that one?
Yeah, again, a good question, Jason. A lot will depend on the individual farm situation. And yes, I mean, we all know you will get a response to fertilizer up to mid-September. The question is the farm in a position to use the grass that's grown as a result of that fertilizer application? If the farm, a lot of farms are so wet at the minute that there has been a build-up of grass. The swards haven't been, it's been impossible to graze the swards down properly. So growing more grass on top of that, I don't see the benefits of adding fertilizer. It's more a case of trying to get out. If we get a bit of decent weather, try and graze those swards down and remove that material so that you've got a decent sward next spring. So choosing dry cows. If you've got quality grass, certainly no problem. Use it for lactating cows. If you've got drier land and you can use the grass through to middle of October, end of October, then you're in a position where you need more grass, then a small amount of fertilizer, 40-50 kilos per hectare at this stage will certainly give it a bit of a boost. But there's no point in applying it if you're not in a position to use it. So you need dry ground, you need quality swards, and that's where I would see it being targeted, as opposed to and stay off it in those other wetter areas where it's going to be a challenge to utilize it.
Okay. A question here, I suppose, just given the straw issues we just mentioned a moment ago, someone's saying, because you obviously can import lucerne straw or hay, should I say, from the continent. I know it's done. There are 1 or 2 farmers growing it, but they're not selling it. But is lucerne hay a worthwhile option to replace straw in the dairy cow diet? Any thoughts on that? I'm not sure even what price it is. Martin, if you have any idea what the price of that is at the moment coming in. I mean, I know it was brought in during the drought 2 years ago.
It's pretty limited. I have no indication what price it is. I suppose it's similar to the biscuits on that diet. You know, you need to analyze it, and is it value for money when you take in transport and purchase costs. So it's got the relative feed value is important, as in all those other alternative forages.
Yeah, I'd agree with Martin, and I think, I mean, there's a lot of interest being expressed in maize silage from down south as well, and you know, it's all about economics. Yes, it could be an option on some farms, but you know, remember that fresh maize being transported up, there's a transport cost. There's potentially 25% losses in dry matter during storage and feeding. So you know, you need to factor that in, that for every ton of fresh material you buy, you've effectively got 3/4 of that available to feed. Whereas some other the dry feeds, concentrates and so on, you have less losses. So it's all about doing the relative value and making sure it's value for money, that you're not paying over the odds simply to get forage. You know, it's a case of eking out what's there, and that's the first option. And certainly, if you need to buy, look very carefully at what the options are, and make sure it's got a good relative feed value relative to the other feeds that are available.
I got into another version of kind of the first question that was asked here from John Rafferty. Would all cows that are in late lactation and not paying their way, I suppose you got a TMR system and a set amount going in there, let's say at 20 to 23 litres, be better off just getting a 3-month dry period and getting the poor quality silage?
I think it's probably, I mean, we did the answers to that earlier. I think it's about cow condition. I would see it certainly is an option to look at for thin cows, and as Mark had highlighted, high cell count cows as well. But the last thing you want is cows that are in good condition and ending up getting over fat. So what you need to do is manage, if you are doing that with cows that are slightly over condition, make sure you're restricting them during the period that you're avoiding them getting over fat, because that's just going to create a problem next lactation. But certainly it's an option for cows, and there are a lot of cows this year that are poorer condition than normal because they have had a tough summer. Particularly those who've been trying to make use of grass. They've lost probably half a condition score on where they would be normally. So it could be a real option for those to, particularly in a grass-based system, to get those cows back up to target for next lactation.
Okay, and one last question, maybe for you, Mark. I'm just sure maybe more a veterinary one. Should I feed good straw with very wet silage? Are there any issues there?
I suppose my first point is you should always feed good straw. The second point is it depends what it's to. I mean, if you have very wet silage and it is your lactating cows, the straw will not help. You need a higher energy and you need to feed more concentrates. Whereas if it is again to your dry cows feeding wet silage, I think the key is to get it analysed and see, you know, how wet it is, what the ME is, what the protein is, and balance it so it could be balanced into those dry cows. But for fresh cows, if you wet silage, I'm afraid it's probably more energy. It's concentrates.
Okay, thank you very much, Jerry. Back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Jason. That was a really excellent question and answer session. And I just want to wrap up at this stage. I won't keep you very long. I just want to say, first of all, that I'm sure everyone has got benefit from the 3 excellent presentations and indeed the question and answers. And as I mentioned earlier, the slides will be available for you consult. I'm sure there's some of the tables in particular you want to look over. From my perspective, I think a message that came through from all of the three presentations is the importance of planning for the challenges facing farmers this winter. And the importance of planning now, don't put it off. Do your fodder budgets, and as Martin emphasised, also your cash flow projections, and indeed don't forget your planning for herd health as well. And I would also think it's important, it might have been Sinclair and Martin emphasised the importance of analysing your silage, because really you can't plan if you don't know the quality. And indeed, a couple of hours spent planning will ease the stress on animals and yourselves. And of course, it's important to consult with your advisor, your nutritionist and your vet. There was one message that came through from the Q&A that's very important, I think anyway, and that it's just because a product might appear cheap doesn't always mean that it's efficient. And you know, when you're in cash flow difficulties, there's always a temptation to resort to something that maybe looks cheap, but a bit more analysis might reveal it's actually very expensive. So on your behalf, I want to thank a few people before saying good night. First of all, again, our three excellent speakers, Sinclair Main, that gave us the research perspective, Martin Reel, the advisor perspective from CAFRE, and Mark Little from Fane Valley provided the veterinary perspective. And of course, I do want to thank my AgriSearch colleagues who were responsible for not only organising this evening's webinar, but also yesterday evening's. And there was a very close conformity, I think, between the messages from last night's webinar and tonight's, with last night dealing with cattle. And the two people mainly responsible are, of course, Jason Rankin and Julian Ahoy. And it's so important that also to acknowledge the contribution of our audience, of you for your questions and your participation. And I want to say just good luck with managing the winter ahead. There's a few events that I want to plug at this point, just for your diary. Forthcoming CAFRE on-farm events dealing with healthy hooves. There are 6 events in all. And the other series dealing with the soil nutrient health scheme, 4 events. AgriSearch, along with the Ulster Farmers Union and AFBI, will continue to organise our webinar series on converting research onto real farms, and there are 5 of those lined up. A couple of conferences that are very important, and I think you'll find a benefit. The upcoming AFBI Soil Health Conference, Jason has the details there up on the slide. And of course, I want to give a particular plug, and you'll excuse me for this, for AgriSearch's inaugural Research and Innovation Needs Conference, which is coming up on the 28th of November. And that's an opportunity for all Northern Ireland farmers to say what they want and expect from the research and innovation organisations that are working in Northern Ireland on your behalf. So finally, I remind you, if you get to take a few minutes out to complete the feedback survey, it'll help us to improve events such as this in the future. So good night and thank you again.